Today we're going to be running through a quick deck tech and guide for Bravo Star the show. The goal here is for you to watch this video and follow along and be able to pick up the deck and be a real threat this entire ProQuest season. With that said, let's get into it. The equipment set up for Bravo Star the show is very straightforward, with the only two slots that see any adjustment are the feet spot and then the offhand slot. With the boots, we only look at a change for Null Rune and a few matchups. And then for the offhand, basically it comes down to if you need Disruption or Arcane Barrier for your offhand item. The core 60 cards to the deck are to the left that you see here. And in this core we run 17 of each element, with every element being a 3 of, with the exception of the ones you see across the bottom here. We only run 2 copies of Blink in the main deck, with the third one in the sideboard, and then 2 copies of Icy Encounter, and then 2 copies of Breakground, with the third copy of it being in the sideboard as well. Since reds are at a premium that don't have an element type, we only run Ulkin Ult and Crippling Crush in the main deck for that reason. Once you figure in the pulses, we have a total of 19 of each element in the deck. And for the sideboard, we have the additional copy of Breakground and Blink that I mentioned earlier, along with 3 copies of Blizzard. And what this element package allows us to do in our sideboard is allow us to adjust our element numbers and ratios depending on the matchup, and can fine-tune those numbers as we see fit. And at the bottom here of our sideboard, we basically have our additional Disruption and Spinal Crush, and then also our package we bring in, including Pulverize and Awakening, and matches that we know we're going to have to race and fear that we could fall behind. Against Bravo Star the show, the equipment change we're going to make is taking out Rampart for Stalagmite, and this is so that late game we can block their Bravo activation attack with Stalagmite to give them the Frostbite token to prevent them from being able to come in with Winter's Well, threatening a Frostbite token against us. We do this on a turn where we have a 5-card hand and cannot afford to receive a Frostbite token in order to be able to come in with the damage we need. And as far as the deck changes, we take out Breakground Red, Blink, and Blue Icy Encounter to bring in Pulverize and both the Awakenings. And this is so that we can always threaten our opponent with an Awakening for Pulverize when we're behind in life. And as other tips for the deck goes, when you go first, you always just want to Arsenal against your opponent so that you don't put them at a lower life and enable them to Awakening the opening turn. And late game, try to save your equipment so that you can block an additional Winter's Well swings from your opponent when on turns you can't afford to get a Frostbite token. Against Prism, the equipment changes we'll make is taking out Rampart for Stalagmite, and this is so that if we ever fall behind on auras, we can block with Stalagmite to prevent them from swinging the rest of them on a turn that they're low on resources. And as far as deck changes go, we take out the Blue Electrify and all 3 copies of Chill to the Bone Blue in order to bring in the 3rd copy of Blink, and then bring in all 3 copies of Blizzard. And as far as tips in the matchup, you want to save your equipment to block out the Heralds of Erudition. And you also, when you have your Bravo activations, the pattern in general will always be attack them with the first attack, and then pick off an aura with Winter's Well. Against Viscerai, the equipment changes we'll make is taking out Rampart and Ironhide Legs to bring in Stalagmite and Null Rune Boots. Stalagmite comes in to add in additional Disruption, and Null Rune Boots come in so we don't take any unnecessary arcane damage. The general plan in this matchup is to be as disruptive and as fast as possible. To do that, the deck changes we make is we take out 2 Evergreen Red, 1 Blue Icy Encounter, and 1 Blink. This is done so that we can bring in all 3 Spinal Crushes and then Blue Breakground. Against Chain and Briar, we take out Rampart and Ironhide Legs to bring in Stalagmite and Null Rune Boots. Stalagmite is to provide additional Disruption, and Null Rune Boots is to prevent any unnecessary arcane damage. As far as deck changes, there are 10 cards that come out and then come back in. We take out all 3 copies of Evergreen Red, all 3 copies of Blue Frostfang, 2 copies of Icy Encounter, and then 2 copies of Blink. We bring in Breakground Blue, all 3 copies of Spinal Crush, both copies of Awakening, Pulverize, and then all 3 copies of Blizzard. The plan here is to be as disruptive as possible. Against Lexi, we use the standard equipment, and as far as deck changes, we take out both copies of Blink, both copies of Icy Encounter, all 3 copies of Blue Frostfang, all 3 copies of Evergreen Red, and then we bring in 3 copies of Blizzard, Pulverize, both Awakenings, all 3 copies of Spinal Crush, and then the Blue Breakground. The plan here is to be as disruptive as possible and block out until we can finally take tempo from our opponent and then hold on to that tempo. Against Kano, the equipment changes we'll make is taking out Ironhide Legs for Null Rune Boots and taking out Rampart for Arcane Lantern. And we run the stock 60 cards in the deck. The plan here is just to be the aggressor and burn them out before they can burn you. Against every other deck, you can run the standard equipment in the standard 60 card main deck. If you have a fear of not being able to race your opponent, feel free to take out the Icing Counter, 2 Evergreen Red, and 1 Blink to bring in the Awakening package that you see here. This allows you to always come back if you fall behind in life. For this next tip, I want to point out a fun interaction you can do late game when you have a Pulse of Candlehold in your hand, a Tunic on 3 counters, and an Arsenal slot. So our opponent attacks us, we take the damage, and we go to our turn. We can announce our Bravo trigger by showing the Earth, Lightning, and Ice cards. And then from here, we can play that Pulse to put back an Oak and Old and an Earth card back on top of our deck. And we want to make sure the Oak and Old is going on the top. Now, we activate our Tunic to activate Crown, and then draw into that Oak and Old. And at this point, you use your Pulse of Candlehold to basically give you an Oak and Old 11 Dominate Go again on command. The last tip I want to cover is a simple pitch stacking strategy I use for Bravo Star of the show. On a normal turn, we have a Bravo activation. When you come in with your attack, you pitch your Lightning card to pay for the attack, and then you pitch your Ice card to come in with Winter's Well. And all you're trying to do is, on the following turn, if you have any duplicate Earth cards, you want to pitch those for Crown of Seeds to pay for that activation. That way you have a clean Lightning, Ice, and Earth stack in the bottom of your deck. This isn't something that's going to happen all the time, but it's something to be mindful of when you're pitching for Crown of Seeds. If you enjoyed this deck tech, be sure to subscribe. And if you have any questions, drop them in the comments below. I do my best to answer all that I can.